Political polarization. It feels like a problem we just can't solve, right? But what if we've been looking in all the wrong places? In this explainer, we're going to use the United States as a kind of case study to dig into the real roots of our division and explore a proven path back toward national unity. Let's dive in.
To really get a handle on this problem, you've got to see it. This chart tracks the ideological gap between the two main parties in the U.S. Congress, and the trend over the last 140 years, well, it's stark. Just look at the far right of that graph. Polarization is literally at its highest point in recorded history. This isn't just a feeling we all have, it's a measurable reality.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? What is truly driving this massive divide? The common narrative usually points to the usual suspects, social media, cable news, but what if that's just scratching the surface? What if the real cause is something much deeper, something that's been building for decades?
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 4 parts. First, we'll nail down the real timeline of polarization. Then, we'll look at the connection to social inequality. Third, we'll see why education is the decisive factor. And finally, we'll talk about how we can actually win this race, because we've done it before.
So let's kick things off with that timeline. This is so important because, if we don't get the diagnosis right, we've got no shot at finding the right cure. We have to know exactly when this trend really started to take off.
So, we're back to this chart, and you look at that steep climb, and your brain immediately goes to one thing: social media. It just feels right, doesn't it? But the data? Well, the data tells a very different and a much more specific story.
Check out this inflection point right here. The big, sustained surge in polarization, it didn't kick off when Facebook and Twitter took over. Nope. It started way back in the mid-1990s. And that's a huge clue, because it forces us to look for a cause that was already brewing long before we were all scrolling on our phones.
And just to put a finer point on it, social media really only became a main news source for most of us around 2015. Think about that. By then, this trend was already 20 years old. Social media didn't start the fire. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire that was already burning out of control.
And this isn't just about politicians disagreeing in Washington. This chart shows how regular Americans feel about the other political party. And look at that, a steady 40-year nosedive starting way back in 1980. This is more than just disagreement. It's a deep-seated animosity that's been growing for decades. It's a trend that clearly started long before the internet age.
Okay, so if the timeline rules out social media as the root cause, what's left? Well, that leads us to our next piece of the puzzle, a powerful underlying force that actually matches our timeline perfectly, and that's the rise of social and economic inequality.
Now, economists use something called the Gini coefficient to measure the gap between the rich and the poor. And what this research shows is a direct, measurable link. A pretty small increase in that economic gap leads to a significant jump in political division. It seems our political health is directly tied to our economic health.
And this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This economic pressure has a truly devastating human cost. This chart here tracks what the economist Angus Deaton calls deaths of despair. Look at how that curve shoots up in recent decades. It's almost a perfect mirror of the charts we saw on polarization and inequality. This isn't just a political or economic crisis, it's a deep psychological one.
And just so we're all on the same page, deaths of despair is a term for mortality from suicide, drug overdoses, and alcohol-related diseases. The fact that these are rising so sharply tells us there's a profound sense of hopelessness spreading through parts of the country. It's a symptom of the very same societal cracks that are fueling our political divide.
So, we've made the connection from polarization to inequality. But what's driving the inequality itself? And this, folks, brings us to our third, and maybe the most crucial part of this whole story, the role of education. The data is pretty clear that the disparity in education is a primary engine for our economic and political divides.
Look at this number, 38 to 75%. That is staggering. What this means is that economists believe the growing gap in education levels explains a huge chunk, up to 3/4, of the rise in wage inequality over the past few decades. The takeaway here is massive. The real chasm in our economy is between those with higher education and those without.
And what happens when you have a huge economic divide? Well, it turns into a political one. It used to be that the best way to guess how someone would vote was to look at their income. Not anymore. Today, the single best predictor is their level of education. We have literally sorted ourselves into 2 different teams, and the dividing line is the college campus.
Now, I know this all sounds pretty grim, but here's the good news. This is where the story pivots toward hope. We have actually faced this exact kind of challenge before, and we beat it. Which brings us to our final section, winning the race between education and technology.
Let's go back to that polarization chart one last time. See that long period of decline from the 1920s to the 1960s? That was a time when the country was actually coming together. So what was going on? What was the secret sauce? Two of the biggest investments in mass education in history, the high school movement and the GI Bill.
And here's how it worked. It was like a three-step formula for unity. Step 1, America dramatically expanded access to high school. Graduation rates went from just 10% in 1910 to 50% by 1940. Step 2, all these new skilled workers meant the wage gap between the educated and the less educated shrank. And step 3, less inequality led directly to less political division. It's a proven playbook.
So the question is, how do we run that play again today? What's our version of the high school movement? Well, all the evidence points to one of the most powerful educational tools we've ever found: personalized human tutoring.
And, I mean, just look at the data. The impact is huge. Tutoring delivers learning gains that are 2 to 7 times bigger than other things we try in schools. To put that in real-world terms, effective tutoring can take a perfectly average student, someone at the 50th percentile, and lift them up into the top quarter of their class. It's absolutely transformative.
But, and this is the big but, there's a major roadblock. While tutoring is incredibly effective, it's also incredibly expensive. We're talking thousands of dollars per student per year. It just hasn't been possible to scale it to the millions of students who need it. And that right there brings us to the final critical question. You know, the last time we won this race, we did it with public schools and paper textbooks. Today, we are standing on the edge of a new frontier. With the power of AI, we might finally have a way to deliver that kind of personalized one-on-one tutoring at a scale and cost we could never have dreamed of. So the question for our leaders, for all of us, isn't really what to do anymore. The question is, do we have the will to use this new technology to win the race all over again?